this boot, and he set it off as a suicide act. And they didn't get killed. The army finished them off. They killed them, later, but
once they were in captivity.
Yeah, yeah. So this is inside the army base.
Okay. And where exactly in?
It's called Nairn. It's north of Guatemala City. It's 5 hours away.
How far is that from the Mexican border?
It's not near the Mexican border.
Okay, well, still.
And don't say it is either.
Well, what happened was in the last weeks, the newspapers have reported the deaths of thousands of Indians close to the Mexican border. So I think they want to do a tie-in. But I think these pictures are representative of the Army.
You can say that's the kind of thing the Army does when they go in.
Yeah, obviously. The close-ups and whatnot are much too graphic for Time magazine, that's for sure, though. So these we have no use, but the overalls are...
Recently, the massacres in Beirut got tremendous international coverage. Yet, on an objective scale, as far as the number of people killed, a few hundred people killed, that happens every week or two in a place like Guatemala. Yet, it rarely gets that kind of attention. Why is that? What are the differences between the two?
The biggest difference is that the Middle East is the single most covered region on the globe. A week rarely goes by that Newsweek magazine does not have a substantial Middle East story. In fact, I can't remember the last time there was one. And this really gets down to the straight. It's a professional principle of journalism rather than having anything to do with politics. If indeed we could find a massacre of 500 people that happens in or near Guatemala City on Friday and we hear about it on Saturday, you can be sure it will be very heavily covered. It's the fact that it happened a long time ago, and you've got to go back and so you have someone come out and say 3 months ago this thing happened. It lacks the drama that they had in something like the Palestinian massacres in Beirut, where you could go in and there were these damn corpses.
The essential difference is the commitment that a news organization makes to covering a place. Because in Guatemala, if you had the presence of correspondents there, 1/3 of what you had in a place like the Middle East. Guatemala is a very small place.
Yeah, there have been massacres an hour away from
with
Guatemala
most of the massacres,
City.
you could be in that little town within 35 minutes, within 1 hour, and it could have happened the day before, and you could do the same. The difference is the correspondents simply aren't there because an overall news judgment has been made that it's not nearly as important an issue.
I'm a freelance reporter and just came back from Guatemala, and I have an interview with an American military man there. Who's doing the same thing that the advisors are doing in El Salvador. And I wanted to find out if you might be interested in running that. Okay. Well, what would you want to do then? I'm in New York at the moment. Yes. I was planning to come down there in the next few days. That's good. Okay. Yeah, there are two other things I have also, which are may also be of interest. One is a series of interviews with frontline Guatemalan troops, where they describe in some detail their torture methods and their massacres they participated in, with their names and so on. And the other is similar material on their use of the U.S. helicopters for bombing. Well, partly with my own funds, and also as working with doing a documentary for a European television crew. And it's called Epidemic. It's a Finnish outfit. In fact, I think you may have, the guy who's working on it mentioned he may have met you in El Salvador. Will you be there tomorrow afternoon? All right. I think I may come down sometime tomorrow morning then. What time starts to be bad for you as far as your being on deadline? 3 and 5. All right. Well, I'll give you a call sometime then. All right. Bye.
And these are the suspected guerrillas who blew themselves up,
Yeah,
or tried to blow themselves up. It is a little graphic. I mean, it's a little bit. It's strong for us, but we've run things like that before. I mean, that's an effective picture.
I wish somebody would use it.
Well, it's really pretty good. Now, I think what we need. Okay, well, you start out with a picture like that. You start out with a story about. Now, Amnesty International says that this is over the last several months that they've killed. I think it was 2,600, tortured and killed 2,600 people. And obviously, the story you want to do is showing what's going on in Guatemala. That Rios Montt, who's this professes to be a born-again Christian, is in fact commander-in-chief of an army that's absolutely terrorizing and murdering the population. So, I mean, how do you tell that story? Obviously, the army isn't going to let you do it. I think you've got some nice. You get a very good sense of what the refugee camps look like. On the other hand, to be a cynical editor, we've seen so many refugee camps in so many places. So that you really want to come in tight, and if your story is the most brutal army in the world, how do you tell that story? And I don't quite see it here.
You want to see something happen?
You want to see a soldier maybe picking through it. Well, you want I mean, that house, there was nothing in it. It was overgrown with weeds, which indicates that it had been a while since anybody had been there. You want a house that's really been freshly invaded. I don't know, kids' shoes lying on the floor, toys, or kitchen utensils to show that somebody was just there, that people lived there.
What is completely missing is placing the attack on the peasantry in Guatemala in the context of long-term American policy towards Guatemala. The consistent American role in maintaining in power the thugs and murderers who are carrying these things out, that's almost never mentioned. And in fact, for example, well, another thing that's never mentioned these days is the Israeli connection. I mean, the Congress has in fact prevented the administration for the last few years from directly aiding and supporting the murderous regime in Guatemala, and they're really about the closest thing to the Nazis that you can find in the contemporary world. They have been prevented by Congress from aiding them directly, so they're doing it indirectly, and they're doing it indirectly through a client state, Israel, which is supplying arms and advisors and so on and so forth. Again, that you may find an occasional reference to that hidden in a story somewhere, but the nature of the system whereby the United States installed, maintained in power, and continues to maintain in power a regime which is, almost unmatched, I suppose, in its violence and brutality and sadism. This analysis of the situation is never presented. The media are major corporations. In fact, in terms of, say, employment, the major corporate media are among the major employers in the country, and they are, in fact, central corporations. So their ownership and management naturally reflects corporate interests. Those are the circles from which it comes, and it's not at all surprising that they reflect those interests.
You mean a general corporate way of thinking?
A kind of a mentality which accepts the framework of assumptions of corporate America, which means also the government, because the linkage is so close.
It's one thing for the media to simply follow the state line in a rather passive manner, as you described, but it's something else for them to see themselves as participants in a high-level dialogue with the state, which I think they very much see themselves as.
Yes, but
and certainly accept all the basic assumptions, no question about that, but feeling that they have to be somehow convinced of basic policies, and generally going along, but occasionally dissenting and trying to nudge the state in one direction or the other.
The journalists and the media in general simply reflect the atmosphere of the general intellectual community, the ideological system as a whole, which is, as in every country virtually, is very supportive of state policy.
because of the alleged human rights violations, the Reagan administration has assured Congress that the United States has no military relationship with Guatemala. But freelance newsman Allan has discovered the U.S. military is involved in Guatemala. CBS News correspondent Ed Rabel in Washington reports.
They call this man Garcia. He is in Guatemala teaching future officers of the Guatemalan army how to fight guerrillas. Use of weapons, map reading, ambush techniques, Garcia teaches them all. So what, you might ask? This is what. This man they call Garcia is from Arizona. He's an American, a Green Beret in the United States Army, Captain Jesse Garcia.
If an American military officer is in Guatemala teaching people how to ambush and how to engage in military operations, then that is just the direct contradiction of everything that Congress has been told by the Reagan administration.
I can teach them all any American infantry type equipment that I've used. Radios, communication equipment, weapons, any of our weapons, M1s, M14s, M16s, M79s.
That this American is teaching such things to Guatemalans with their record on human rights makes some congressmen on the House Foreign Affairs Committee angry. What makes them more angry, they say, is that the administration seems to have violated an informal agreement granting the congressman what amounts to a veto over any United States military assistance to Guatemala. The Army says Captain Garcia is in Guatemala as part of an officer exchange program.
This is not a hidden program. We've been doing it for about 40 years, for the last 6 in Guatemala. We have an exchange instructor. He is teaching students in an academic environment. The Army holds that that's not an advisory effort, and we're not trying in any way, shape, or form to circumvent congressional understandings.
The administration has on, I don't know how many occasions, just constantly assured the Congress over the last 2 years that we are not engaged in a military relationship with Guatemala, that we're not providing training for the Guatemalan military, that we, it could not be any more clear.
In addition to the Garcia case, the congressmen are worried about the proposed sale of $3 million worth of spare parts to Guatemala for its military helicopters. Just last week, the congressman got word that the State Department may okay the sale without congressional approval.
I think if the administration goes forward with the proposal to sell military equipment to the government of Guatemala without the approval of those of us in Congress who entered into this agreement with them, it'll be a very direct breach of faith with the Congress.
A State Department official says the matter is being discussed with Congress, but would not say whether a congressional stamp of approval is needed to sell the spare parts to Guatemala. Ed Rabel, CBS News, Washington.